Healthcare, we have the solution to healthcare. No solutions are perfect, but they certainly are a lot better than the problems. Universal healthcare, the single-payer Canadian system. In Canada, you have free choice of doctor, hospital on 10% of their economy, maybe 11% now. Everybody has access to health care from cradle through nursing home. And I might add, our country's going to spend 15% this year on health care, with tens of millions of people being excluded, dropped out, or otherwise underinsured. Yeah, the Conservative Party in Ottawa built up a huge deficit. The Liberal Party is now squeezing the provinces in terms of the contribution to the health care budget. But by comparison with our problems, we should have Canada's problems in terms of health care coverage. Modern public transit, all kinds of new technologies, flexible, fast, safe. Look at the work done at Northwestern University for almost 30 years on this subject, and ask yourself, why don't we have the kind of modern public transit that's fast, reliable, that's very close to zero polluting? We have the solution. Agriculture, instead of highly chemical intensive agriculture burning the earth, contaminating farmers and farm workers alike in one of the more occupationally hazardous workplaces in the country. It's been proven again and again. Pest management control, organic agriculture, all kinds of crop rotation. Education. Education, at best, is now a trade school. It's just a job training center at best for corporations, instead of the liberal education, the civic education that needs to go on. Up in colleges, they're vocational schools now, preparing themselves to be small cogs in big corporate wheels, instead of learning how to be civically skilled. Why don't we do that? This country's full of work that has to be done. The jobs aren't there because the federal budgets are not allocated into productive enterprise, because trillions of dollars of pension funds are being used for mergers and acquisitions and empire building instead of productive activity back in the communities where the workers earned these pension dollars. The student public interest research groups around the country on 200 campuses. Those are the principal centers for practicing democracy, supported by the students. They try to expand to other universities. They have to get the approval of the Board of Trustees and the President. And the corporations dominate the boards of trustees of universities and colleges. And they say to the students, no, you can't have, based on a referendum, a simple checkoff on the tuition bill so you can use your own money to build your own nonprofit citizen group, to improve the community, state, and nation where you live, to develop your civic skills, which the colleges do not teach. No, you can't even have a checkoff where the students who lose the election and who are opposed to the checkoff can still get their money back, so that the majority rights are protected and the minority rights are protected. No, they are telling the young people in America, you cannot even use your money through a convenient collection facility as a community of students on campus based on an election of students to improve the society and link knowledge to action. This is what's going on. Let me just give you an idea of the kinds of tools that we can use. All across the country, the time dollar concept is spreading. That's where people convert time into a currency. Elderly people help tutor youngsters for 50 hours. It's put in a computer time bank by a community group or a college. And then when the elderly people want help to go someplace or to have something on in the yard, they get 50 hours back. That is spreading all over the country. A new form of creative currency for people who don't have much money but have a lot of time. It binds the neighborhood together. It turns strangers into friends. It fights the atomization and the destruction of community by the impersonal economic forces that characterize our corporate-dominated economy. And the other tools are quite obvious, too. Those of you from Illinois, anybody here from Illinois? One, two. This is the Citizen Utility Board concept. How do you get people who are ratepayers for electric, telephone, gas companies, who are tenants, who are customers of insurance companies and banks, how do you get them to band together and form their own civic action groups? By putting a facility, inviting them to join in precisely the message that will get their interest. The insurance company bill, the bank statement, the utility company bill. It works like a charm. These are the tools of democracy. When this was put in the bill in the early 80s in Illinois, 200,000 people signed up, customers of electric, telephone, gas companies. They have their own full-time advocates, lawyers, economists, organizers. They've built up a community intelligence in meetings around the state. They've saved over $4 billion in utility rates, including a $1.3 billion refund from Commonwealth Edison in September 1993. And they're there when the consumer's voice is needed. Now watch how it works. This is ready to spread all over the country. So that no longer people would take it on the chin without fighting back in health insurance, auto insurance, homeowner insurance, the latter being canceled when there's a hurricane. So they wouldn't take it on the back when they were redlined, when they were overcharged by the banks, when the banks took their savings and invested in suburbs and disinvested in the inner city. And this was about to sweep the country. What more universal tool could it be? It's up to the people to join or not join. They pay with their own money. It doesn't cost the taxpayer anything, and the consumer group pays for the insert. The Supreme Court, 1986, came in with a 5-3 decision. This shows you what happens when a corporation is deemed a person. They ruled on a case out of California that a corporate monopoly, that is a utility company in California, could not be required to put an insert in their billing envelope because it would violate the corporate monopoly's right to remain silent, not respond to it, and therefore it violated the First Amendment rights of this artificial entity. Corporation is a person. Now this is the same corporation that can charge you, the ratepayer, for its legal fees, tackling you, for its advertising fees, for its propaganda inserts. That's okay to put that in the rate base, but not a no expense to the company insert that would form a more level playing field. Tools of democracy should be a priority for the Green Party and citizens all over the country. The labor laws have to be upgraded. They cannot be utilized by industrial workers in particular. So weakened have they become. The taxpayer should have checkoffs on tax returns to deal with taxpayer assets being ripped off by corporations, like the federal lands, like medical research and development, like all kinds of innovations that the taxpayer has paid for. It is outrageous. It is outrageous that a woman with ovarian cancer has to pay Bristol-Myers Squibb over $10,000 for a series of treatments to get the drug Taxol, which was developed from A to Z by $31 million of taxpayer money out of the National Institutes of Health and given free with no price control and no royalties back to you, the taxpayer, to Bristol-Myers Squibb that immediately priced it at over $10,000. The same occurred to AZT. The same occurred to all kinds of drugs where sick people are now expected to fork over $50,000, $100,000. This is in America, when many of these drugs are paid for or substantially paid for by tax money in terms of the National Institutes of Health drug research and development programs. Our elections and election procedures need change. The way you get public elections, the public funding of public elections, and you know, what's the alternative? It's either General Motors, General Electric, or DuPont funding our elections, or it's public financing of elections. It can be done. It's simple. Check this out. The best investment return in the history of the world is the $1 billion that corporate-sourced campaign money puts into federal elections every 2 years. Can you imagine the tens of billions of dollars they get in return? Corporate welfare. The non-enforcement of health and safety laws, the inflated and wasteful government contracts, the seizure of the public lands, the appropriation of all these taxpayer assets. $1 billion. What's $1 billion? They have $12 billion in debt erased with one paragraph, $8 billion in another. They get away with $100 billion of health care fraud just on the bills that they submit. Pretty soon it adds up to real money. Now, how do we replace that $1 billion every 2 years? First of all, by a well-promoted voluntary dues checkoff on the 1040 tax return, up to $100 per taxpayer, if the taxpayer chooses to contribute, and a certain amount of free time on radio and TV for ballot qualified candidates. And guess what? That amounts, by the way, to about $7 per taxpayer per year, every 2 years, excuse me. And it will be less than $1 billion every 2 years because they won't have to spend so much money to raise it. So public financing of public elections. The $1 billion displacement movement must start immediately. How about ballot access barriers? Our political electoral system is not kind to small political starts. It's not kind to acorns. It says to the acorn, you got to be an oak tree. Voila, immediately before you get on the ballot or you qualify. Now, what's interesting here is this. Because there are so few independent petitions for presidential candidates by grassroots groups, a number of states had barriers that were surmountable. What happened in the last 8 years? As more and more third-party candidates got on, states like Texas started passing laws to make it more onerous, a larger number of signatures, a larger number of disqualifications in order to get, through petition, a candidate on the ballot. And that's what you're going to confront in the next legislative sessions of the states. The two-party duopoly wants to control the electoral arena, and they will do everything to exclude petitions and citizen parties from competing with them. And that has got to be removed so that a real, genuine tool of democracy means the ease of getting on the ballot. And how about more direct democracy when representative democracy makes a mockery of itself because it's in hock to special interest groups? The initiative, the referendum, the recall should be in every state of the union. And those Republicans who campaigned in New Jersey to elect a Republican governor and a Republican legislature on the promise that they would bring to New Jersey the initiative, referendum, and recall, double-crossed the voters and pursued business as usual. That's why you can't rely on this kind of elected officials and why we have to have the direct democracy insurance policy. How about this? None of the above. Binding none of the above. In our country, you can't go to the polls and vote no. All you can do is either vote yes for somebody or stay home and not vote and be called apathetic and a dropout. How do you vote no? How do you say you don't care for the candidates on the ballot? You vote. Even Green will have a none of the above on the ballot. It's part of the platform. Binding none of the above congeals a protest vote, a no vote, a go back and give us something better. And if none of the above wins and gets more votes than the other candidates on the ballot, it cancels the election, sends the candidates packing, and orders a new election 30 days from now. Absolutely. By the way, we now have a project out of Pennsylvania to advance the binding none of the above, whether by initiative or by legislation. By initiative, it's much more likely. It can be done at the local level, for starters, at the state, eventually at the national level. I love to see the politicians who've been defeated by none of the above. No longer will they be able to say to the American people, vote for one of us or stay home. That's the key change. Term limits. I'm for 12 years term limits on the grounds that most people, after 12 years in Congress or in state legislatures, with almost no exception, maybe 1 or 2 out of 100, either sell out or wear out. They get resigned. They start throwing in the towel. They get eroded. They tire. New energies are needed. And so let's start thinking about how can we develop these more powerful citizen tools of democracy for workers, taxpayers, consumers, voter citizens, and investor shareholders, especially through pension plans. Do you know that the labor pool of pension money, if it was controlled by the workers through intermediate mechanisms, could control many of the large corporations on the New York Stock Exchange? Because that's where the money is invested. Isn't it time that we made a national political issue out of this enormous anomaly? That we own the public airways but don't control anything. That we own the public lands but don't control our public lands. That we own $4 trillion of pension monies and don't control their investment. That we own trillions of dollars of mutual insurance and mutual savings. And the banks and the insurance companies and other corporations control what we legally own. And that's partially a problem that comes from growing up corporate, from being told from when we were very young that if we work hard and make money, we'll be able to own individual property like a car, a boat, a home, a piece of land. But we're never told that we are already owners by virtue of our birthright, of the great commonwealth of resources and assets, from the natural resources on the public lands to the huge pools of capital controlled by the grip of a few giant corporate investors. And so, we need to keep looking to reconstruct civic communities. Where there is no community, there is crisis. Without people, nothing is possible. Without institutions, nothing is lasting. We have to keep creating them. The corporate juggernaut is such that it cannot tolerate strong countervailing communities, whether of workers, whether of parties that are independent of them, whether they're consumer associations, whether they're students who want to band together for civic engagement and improvement of their society. It's really not surprising that many of the things they're doing against public education, against community services, the whole privatization, the whole corporatization movement is designed to take public communities and turn them into private profit-making centers where the sense of community service and obligation is eliminated. That's what user fees are all about. Oh, you want to use the library? You got to pay every time you go in there. Pay as much as you use. The library in America was built as a community service, community supported. You want to use the national parks? Oh, you got to pay. If you don't use it, you don't pay. It breaks the whole community service apart. And they're doing this now in the healthcare industry at some extreme level. Some years ago, I looked at a community and said, what a great community this could be. Alumni classes of colleges and professional schools, like law schools and medical schools. Most of you are members of alumni class at college. What do you remember going back to reunions? They flatter you, they give you a free meal, they urge you to write a check to the alma mater, but they don't seem to ask for your intelligence. And so at a pre-reunion meeting with my Princeton classmates and later with my law school classmates, we decided to form a Center for Civic Leadership, which now places 10% of the student undergraduates in Princeton in civic action organizations for the summer or for postgraduate fellowships. Law school. My law school classmates are mostly corporate lawyers. They're beginning to reflect on how much they really have to give to advance justice in society. They've usually made a lot of money. Their children are secure. Sometimes their great-grandchildren are secure. And they now have banded together in an Appleseed Foundation, which hires young organizers to establish centers for law and justice in every state of the country. This is one law school alumni class telling these mainstream lawyers, your first responsibility is the advancement of justice in America. Your responsibility. And if our courts are clogged, and if our courts are inaccessible, and if our neighborhood legal services offices are being shut down, and if people are being excluded from access to justice, you have the first responsibility because you are the member and a leading member of the legal profession. First, you are a lawyer for justice in America. Second, you are an attorney for your clients on retainer. We should look for more communities. We have got to rebuild democracy. Without democracy, there's no justice, there's no real choice, there's no civil rights, there's no civil liberties, there's no economic prosperity for the mass of the people. Our country now is displaying signs of the results of oligarchy, plutocracy, and the rule of the rich over the many. We are now displaying signs of civic disintegration. The disintegrating forces that are at work are not being countervailed by all the charities from coast to coast. We're losing the charity race. And besides, a democracy means that justice prevails, and charity is not needed when justice prevails. And so we're left with the final challenge, civic motivation. How do we get more citizens to be public citizens, to get the self-confidence, to develop their latent talents, to show what they can do from their neighborhood to their community, to their city, town, village, farm area, to the nation, to the world? This world is full of great challenges that only civically motivated people will step up to, because civically motivated people have a higher estimate of their own significance in life. They will not be marginalized, trivialized, or corporatized. There you go. So we 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 go. Now, I'd like to address three age groups very briefly. The youngsters, whether they're teenagers, pre-teenagers, people in their 20s, called Generation X by some marketeer. First, look at the history of how young people have changed history. How in the past, young people have made history all over the world, and they still are. They're on the barricades as we speak, trying to overthrow tyrants in order to get the rights that you have in this country, which too often you take for granted and don't use. Most people your age in dictatorships would sacrifice almost anything to have the right to vote and the right to live in a democracy and the right of habeas corpus and the right of civil liberties and civil rights. And yet, not more than 20 to 25% of young Americans aged 18 to 25 bother to vote. Look at your history. Who led with courage, determination, and risk the struggles for the civil rights movement in America in the 60s, for the anti-war movement, for the environmental movement? Who struggled to give students rights on campus where they were being patronized? People who were very young. Who is leading the fight against brutalized child labor in third world countries in Canada? A 13-year-old boy. His name is Craig. He was on 60 Minutes recently. He has alerted the nation to our north. He's gone to these countries. He's mobilized human interest groups. He's 13. Took 7 weeks off from school to do an on-site visit in Southeast Asia. And when the interviewer on 60 Minutes said, "Why are you doing this?" he said, "Why not?" Here's one 13-year-old who's not spending half his waking hours watching MTV. Sorry, Tab.